The fire wasn't large, not at first. Just a strange smell, burning plastic and smoke, wafting out into the hallway of a quiet apartment high-rise in Chicago's Lakeview neighborhood. It was February 21st, 1977, a Monday night. Cold wind swept off Lake Michigan, and most residents had already settled in for the evening. But on the 15th floor, something was wrong. A neighbor noticed the odor first and called the building's janitor, who soon traced it to Unit 15B. No one answered the door. The smoke was getting thicker. By the time firefighters arrived and broke down the door, they were met with the dense, toxic haze of smoldering upholstery and burning wood. The fire hadn't spread far, but the heat had already scorched the room. As they made their way inside, the flames revealed a grotesque scene. In the bedroom, beneath a torched mattress, they found a body, naked, badly burned, face down on the floor. She had been stabbed in the chest with a butcher knife, and the fire hadn't started by accident. Someone had set her on fire after she was dead. The body was later identified as Teresita Basa, age 47. A woman so quiet and reserved that most of her neighbors barely knew she existed. But after her death, the entire city would know her name. Because Teresita Basa, murdered, stripped, and burned, was about to speak again. And what she had to say would turn a homicide case upside down. Teresita had come to America from the Philippines in the early 1960s. She was bright, humble, highly educated, and deeply polite in that way only people from another era or culture seem to be. She had a master's degree in music, but she made her living as a respiratory therapist at Edgewater Hospital in Chicago. She kept mostly to herself, lived alone in a modest but tidy apartment. She had no criminal record, no enemies, and didn't seem to harbor any secrets. Her co-workers liked her. She was dependable, quiet, and kind. Some considered her shy. But behind that quiet nature, she was thoughtful and perceptive. A music lover, a devoted daughter, a woman who had left everything behind to find a life on her own terms in a new country. Her murder stunned everyone who knew her, and it left police with a disturbing mystery. The scene suggested a possible sexual assault, but no evidence supported that theory. Her body was naked, yes, but there were no signs of trauma consistent with rape. Her clothes weren't torn. Her body wasn't bruised in that way. The attack didn't fit the usual profile. Whoever had done this had staged it to look like something it wasn't. The apartment had been ransacked, her purse emptied, drawers pulled out. But when her friends and family were asked if anything valuable was missing, no one could say for sure. Her jewelry? Maybe some was gone, but she didn't own much of value to begin with. Then police found a single clue. A note, handwritten by Teresita, discovered in her calendar. It read, "Get theater tickets for A.S." There were no other initials like it in her contacts. Who was A.S., and what could have brought them to her door? The weeks dragged on. The murder slipped from the headlines. The fire had destroyed any hope of finding DNA evidence. No one had seen anything suspicious. There was no forced entry. The building was secure. Investigators followed every lead they could think of. Ex-boyfriends, co-workers, past patients. Nothing stuck. No fingerprints. No murder weapon beyond the knife still in her chest. No motive. No suspect. No justice. Until one day, 5 months later, the police got a call. The man on the other end of the line was Dr. Jose Chua, and he wasn't calling with a tip or an alibi. He was calling with a story he didn't want to tell. Dr. Chua was a respected physician living in Skokie, Illinois. Like Teresita, he was from the Philippines. His wife, Remy, also worked in healthcare, a respiratory therapist at the very same hospital where Teresita had been employed. That was how she knew her. Not closely, not intimately, but enough to say hello. Remy had recently fallen ill, suffering from a mysterious exhaustion and strange behaviors, memory lapses, changes in mood, sudden trances. At first, they thought it was a breakdown, stress from overwork. But something else was happening, something no one could explain. Dr. Chua described moments when his wife would fall into a deep sleep, or what looked like sleep, and then sit up, speaking in a voice that wasn't hers. Calm, but insistent. Formal, deliberate, with an accent that didn't belong to her. And the voice said her name was Teresita. Through tears, Dr. Chua admitted to the detectives, "I think she's being possessed." He didn't want to believe it. He was a man of science, trained to think rationally, but he was desperate, terrified. And the voice, coming from his wife's lips, had a message. "I was murdered. My killer is Alan Showery." The detectives were stunned. Alan Showery? They'd never heard the name. It wasn't in Teresita's notes or contact list. But Dr. Chua explained. The voice had told him Alan had been invited to Teresita's apartment under the guise of fixing her television. He worked as an orderly at the hospital. She trusted him, but he had no intention of helping. He attacked her, strangled her, staged the scene. And then, the voice added one more detail. He stole jewelry from her dresser, heirloom pieces from the Philippines, and gave them to his girlfriend. It was the kind of detail police couldn't ignore. They ran a check. Alan Showery did work at Edgewater Hospital. He had known Teresita. He lived nearby. And just like that, the investigation came back to life. Police visited Alan at his home. He was polite, confident, cooperative. He admitted he knew Teresita and that he had, in fact, visited her apartment the night she was killed. Yes, he'd tried to help with her television. No, he hadn't succeeded. He left shortly after, he said. But then detectives asked to speak with his girlfriend. They asked her about some of the jewelry she wore, items she said were gifts, and when they brought in Teresita's family to identify the pieces, there was no doubt. The jewelry had belonged to Teresita. They had found the stolen items, just as the voice claimed. Confronted with the evidence, Alan Showery confessed. He said he needed money and that Teresita had offered to help him pay his electric bill, but in his own words, he panicked. Something in him snapped. He strangled her with his bare hands, stripped her body to make it look like a sexual assault, then set the apartment on fire. Just like the voice had said. The trial was a spectacle. Reporters flocked to the courtroom. The story made national headlines. The woman who solved her own murder. The prosecution tried to avoid the paranormal angle, but the defense latched onto it. They painted the Chuas as superstitious, claimed Remy had fabricated the whole thing. They even tried to say the police had planted the jewelry, an outrageous claim with no support. But the strangest twist of all? The first trial ended in a hung jury. 11 jurors wanted to convict. 1 did not. So they prepared for a second trial. And before it could begin, Alan Showery changed his plea. He admitted guilt. He was sentenced to 14 years for murder and arson. He served just under 5. No one could explain why. Remy and Jose Chua disappeared from public life. They gave a handful of interviews but stopped discussing the case shortly after the trial. Remy never claimed to have psychic powers, never profited from the story, never asked to be believed. But even now, decades later, the story endures. Not just because of the crime, but because of the voice. The voice that spoke through another woman. The voice that said, "I was murdered." The voice that named her killer. And the voice that refused to be silenced. Thank you for listening to The Lantern's Tale. Subscribe for more true stories, if you dare.